In the summer of 1942, Adolf Hitler turned his gaze east once more. Convinced that the Soviet Union was on the verge of collapse, the German army had already driven deep into Soviet territory, smashing cities, encircling millions of soldiers, and claiming victory after victory. But one city now stood in the path of the Wehrmacht's ambition, a city that would become a symbol of resistance, sacrifice, and total war. Its name was Stalingrad. What began as another German offensive would soon descend into the deadliest battle in human history, a struggle so brutal that survival itself became an act of defiance, and victory came not through speed or technology, but through endurance measured in blood and rubble. Stalingrad was not chosen only for its name, though that alone carried enormous symbolic weight, bearing the name of Joseph Stalin himself. Its capture would be a propaganda triumph for Nazi Germany, a blow to Soviet morale and a personal humiliation for the Soviet leader. But Stalingrad was also strategically vital. It sat on the western bank of the Volga River, a critical artery for transporting oil, grain, and supplies from the Soviet interior. Control of the city would sever Soviet logistics and secure Germany's southern flank as it pushed toward the oil fields of the Caucasus. To Hitler, Stalingrad was the key to breaking the Soviet Union once and for all. By August 1942, German forces reached the outskirts of the city. The Luftwaffe unleashed a devastating bombardment, reducing entire neighborhoods to ruins. Fires raged for days. Tens of thousands of civilians were killed in the opening weeks alone. Streets vanished beneath collapsed buildings. Factories became skeletons of twisted steel, and the city transformed into a landscape of ash and debris. Yet these ruins, intended to break resistance, would soon become Stalingrad's greatest defense. When German troops entered the city, they expected another rapid victory. Instead, they encountered nightmare. Soviet defenders clung to every building, every cellar, every staircase. The fighting became so close that artillery and air power lost much of their effectiveness. Battles were fought room by room, floor by floor, sometimes with soldiers separated by only a single wall. This kind of combat earned a new name among the Germans, Rattenkrieg, Rat War. It was brutal, intimate, and relentless. Soviet commander Vasily Zhukov understood that distance favored the Germans, so he ordered his troops to stay as close to the enemy as possible. By hugging German positions, Soviet soldiers denied the Luftwaffe the ability to strike without risking friendly fire. Snipers became legends, nowhere more famously than in the shattered ruins overlooking Red October factory. Supply lines were perilous. Reinforcements crossed the Volga under constant bombardment, often at night, many never making it to shore. Those who did were told there was no retreat. There is no land beyond the Volga, Zhukov said. For many, Stalingrad became a place entered only once. As autumn turned to winter, the battle intensified. German forces controlled most of the city, but could never fully destroy the Soviet defenders. Meanwhile, far beyond the ruins, the Red Army was preparing something the Germans did not expect. In November 1942, Soviet forces launched Operation Uranus, a massive counter-offensive aimed not at the city itself, but at the weaker Axis armies guarding the German flanks. Romanian, Italian, and Hungarian units, poorly equipped for the Russian winter, collapsed under the assault. Within days, Soviet pincers closed around the German Sixth Army, trapping over 250,000 troops inside Stalingrad. For the first time in the war, an entire German army was encircled. Panic spread among the German commanders, but Hitler refused retreat. He promised that the Luftwaffe would supply the trapped forces by air, a promise that proved catastrophically unrealistic. Aircraft were shot down, airfields were overrun, and supplies fell far short of what was needed. Hunger, disease, and frostbite began killing as effectively as Soviet bullets. Temperatures plunged below -30 degrees Celsius. Soldiers burned furniture, books, even doors to stay warm. Horses were slaughtered for food. Ammunition dwindled. Hope faded. Inside the pocket, German resistance slowly collapsed. Soviet forces tightened the noose, advancing through the frozen ruins with relentless pressure. Fighting continued into January 1943, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. On February 2nd, the last German units surrendered. It was the first time a field marshal of the German army had ever been captured alive. The myth of Nazi invincibility was shattered in the snow and rubble of Stalingrad. The cost of the battle was staggering. Nearly 2 million soldiers and civilians were killed, wounded, or captured. Entire divisions vanished. Families were erased. The city itself was almost completely destroyed. Yet the victory at Stalingrad marked a decisive turning point in World War II. From that moment on, the German army was largely on the defensive in the east. The momentum had shifted. The Red Army would continue pushing westward all the way to Berlin. Stalingrad was not just a military victory. It became a symbol of sacrifice beyond measure, of endurance in the face of annihilation, and of the brutal reality of total war. It demonstrated that modern warfare was no longer about swift campaigns alone, but about industrial capacity, logistics, and the will of entire populations to survive unimaginable destruction. The city that Hitler sought to erase instead broke the backbone of his eastern ambitions. Today, the city is known as Volgograd. Monuments rise where ruins once stood. The Volga still flows, calm and indifferent, past the ground where millions fought and died. The Battle of Stalingrad remains a warning carved into history, a reminder of how close the world came to catastrophe, and how one ruined city became the place where the tide of the most destructive war ever fought was finally turned.